Hey guys, it's Danny. Alrighty, in today's video we're gonna make a tiny little analogy because I absolutely love analogies, and we're gonna talk about playing the orchid game and obeying certain rules. Now if you know me, you know I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of rules, and when I can bend them, I surely do, but I'm not quite totally irresponsible, and I do admit some rules are made in the benefit of us and because there are many things that we cannot change when we're growing orchids. Now I decided to make this video because many times I do get questions or comments that ask me why so much hassle or so many rules with orchids when in nature things are totally different. Nobody cares about sheltering orchids from certain things and they do just great. And though I've talked about the differences between nature and our home space in the past, today I'm going to talk about the light aspect because this is what the comment was referring to. I'll probably touch base with other things, but mainly I will refer to light, as I made a video a few days ago talking about the light requirements for orchids and why we classify them as low and medium and highlight and so on. If you somehow missed that video, I'll be sure to add it in the description. But without further blabbing, let's start the subject and talk about that little analogy. So let us pretend that the orchid growing hobby is actually a game, more specifically a survival game. And all of us here are fans of the genre. All survivor games have the same goal. You need to survive by the end of the game. Therefore, all of them must be the same. Well, actually no, there are tens if not hundreds of games, survival games, which have the same goal but play by totally different rules. In one game, we might need to collect certain objects and manufacture tools or weapons that will help us fight off the beasts or whatever the game throws at us. While in other games, we would need to collect already made objects that we can find in buildings, and they'll help us survive by the end of the game. So if we try to apply the rules of the second game to the first game, well, we will surely fail the game because there will be no object already made in the game. We need to make them ourselves. So the rules are quite different in the first game. Well, surprise, surprise, in the orchid hobby, things are pretty much the same. Because each and every one of us, even though we're playing the same genre of game, we might play different games. And so, let us talk some practice now. The question was, why do we need to classify orchids in low, medium, and highlight orchids, make so many rules, so many measurements, when in nature the very same orchids might grow under totally different light conditions. For example, vandas, which are highlight orchids, I was telling you in the video it's always good to shelter them a little bit from the sun with a sheer curtain or a shading cloth rather than put them in direct sunshine. Why can they survive in nature in direct sunshine and we hassle with so much sheltering? Well, it's pretty easy because the game we're playing is the home-growing game. It's not the nature game. Now, besides the obvious differences from our growing space to the nature growing space, there are some other things that are completely, totally out of our control, such as the position in which our country is located on the planet. What do I mean by that? Well, the intensity of the sun. You might have already heard people saying in winter the sun is not as strong as in summer. Well, this doesn't really mean that in the winter it's cold and that's why the sun is not strong. It actually means it is cold because the sun doesn't hit the earth in the same way it does in the summer. This is not generally valid on all places on Earth. The closer you are to the equator, the more this statement is not valid. And the further up you go to the poles, the more the discrepancy between summer and winter becomes more visible. And without getting into too much detail, I'll of course share with you a link down below that explains it better if you're interested in that. It all has to do with the position of the Earth, which is not straight. It is slightly tilted. And also with the shape of the Earth. It is not a cube with equal sides, it is a sphere. What does this mean? Well, let's imagine this is the Earth and these are the rays of the sun. At the equator, the sun rays fall pretty straight on the Earth, forming quite a steep angle. But remember, the Earth is round and also is tilted. So the further up you go, the rays of the sun do not produce such a steep angle. They will actually fall on a much more decreased angle. And this actually translates in less intensity. The differences between summer and winter are not related to the position of the Earth in regards to the sun, because paradoxically enough, it's closer to the sun in the winter time for the northern hemisphere and is actually furthest from the sun summer in summer, again for the northern hemisphere. It has to do with the angle at which the rays hit the Earth. When the angle at which the rays hit the Earth is not steep, that is the time where the rays of the sun are least powerful. And vice versa, if the rays are at a steeper angle, they will actually hit the Earth with more intensity. So alrighty, what has that got to do with orchids? Pretty simple. Most orchids we are growing come from a more tropical region, closer to the equator. In their natural habitat, this difference between winter and summer is not as dramatic as in a position further from the equator. If we grow orchids in that location, our orchids will be subjected to light intensity variations depending on the season. And this actually affects the behavior of an orchid. Now, in my previous video about light, I shared with you down below the idea that orchids and plants in general produce a certain chemical compound that protects them against heat stress. In wintertime, if we are in one of those locations in which light intensity decreases dramatically, the orchids will not produce the same quantity of that compound because it is not needed. The sun is not powerful. But then in the spring, as the sun rays start to fall at a steeper and steeper angle, it becomes stronger. So the orchids would need more of that compound to be protected from heat stress. And sometimes this phenomenon catches them unprepared. So the very same orchid grown in this particular location will behave and will be affected very differently than the very same orchid which grows in a much closer to the equator location. The more stable things are from the point of view of light, the more stable the chemical balance in the orchid will be as well. When we have severe light variations for long enough, the orchid will adapt to whatever those variations are, because in the end the orchid is trying to be efficient with what it produces and how it behaves, and if there is no need for that chemical compound, the orchid will not produce it. When the compound will be needed again, it will be produced in higher quantities, but things should not happen overnight, because at least when it comes to light, orchids simply cannot adapt from one day to the other. They need time. Therefore, in practice, we need to adjust orchids to light levels, just so we make sure that they're not caught unprepared. Now, if we lived in the tropics, this aspect might just be very strange to us. But because of our location, we absolutely need to change the rules of the game. To further add to this, there's also day length and night length. The closer you are to the equator, the less difference you will have between day and night. And of course, vice versa. The further you are from the equator, the more you will experience differences in between night and day. This is also a factor that changes the game for many of us. We might need to supplement light. Now, what I talked about is mainly from the point of view of somebody living in the northern hemisphere, but there's also the southern hemisphere, and you might already know when we experience winter, the southern hemisphere experiences summer. There are even more differences between the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So again, we need to change the game, the rules, and adapt to what we're actually playing. As for the middle, the equator, things will always tend to be more balanced when it comes to light, no matter the season. So it's easy to see now why some of us cannot play by the same rules that apply to the actual location in which these orchids are found in nature. Not all orchids are found in the tropics, some of them are found further up or further down, and yet again, depending on our location, we need to change the game in accordance to our location. So as much as we try to copy the natural conditions of some orchids, sometimes it is absolutely impossible to replicate the same exact conditions. And in many cases, it's not even wise to apply the same things that apply in a different location than ours. After all, if we play a survivor game in which we need to build tools, well, we need to build tools, because nobody will drop them out of the sky for us. One of the effects of too much sun intensity on orchids is leaf burn, as I was mentioning in the previous video. Leaf burns start to happen when the leaf gets overheated. Now, overheating of leaves has to do with the light intensity, yes, but it also has to do with other things, such as air movement. Now, because in nature, orchids are not confined to a room or a greenhouse, or any type of box, let's call it like that, there is always constant air movement. Air movement actually decreases the surface temperature of the leaf. And while in nature air is free to move, in a house things might not be the same. Depending on what type of game we're playing, maybe we're just playing the Phalaenopsis game in a normal home, or maybe we're playing the different orchids in a greenhouse, air movement might be an issue or not. In a normal home, it might. We might not be able to keep windows open all the time, and maybe we're living in a crowded location with a lot of tall blocks that impair air movement. In a greenhouse, maybe we can use fans, or maybe we can keep everything open, but that again is a totally different game. But not only air movement can decrease the leaf temperature, also humidity. Humidity in combination with air movement contributes to protection against overheating. And again, if we play the game at home, we might not have high humidity and we might need to compensate with other things, or we might need to adjust light levels. And if this isn't enough, well, the orchids we grow might be natural species or botanical species as they call them, or they might be hybrids. Now, what happens with an orchid, let's say a cattleya, and I have the perfect example, it's the Hawaiian splashlea. What happens if a cattleya family member is the product of two parents which have different light and heat requirements? And I can tell you that the Hawaiian splashlea cannot tolerate the same amount of light as other cattleyas. Well, who knows? Depends on the hybrid. The hybrid might look like a typical normal cattleya, but inherit less tolerant genes when it comes to high light and high heat resistance, or vice versa. No way to tell until you actually grow it and figure it out. So in this case, even if we're dealing with a cattleya which normally grows in full sun, the natural species, the fact that we have a hybrid absolutely changes the game. We cannot apply the same rules that would apply to a species to our particular hybrid, even if it has that species in her parentage. We need to know both of the species or both of the hybrids that went into the creation of our orchid. So you can see how things are a bit complicated sometimes. Now, this theory and analogy can apply to a whole lot of things. It can apply to the type of medium we're using, or the type of pot, or the setup, or the grow room we have, not only to our location. It has certain limitations, but it can also leave a space to become creative and resourceful and problem-solving oriented. Even though we're all playing the very same type of game, we're not all playing the same game. And in these instances, we absolutely need to obey some rules in order to get the results that we're expecting. If we think that, let's say, an orchid is perfectly fine in nature, in direct sunshine, or is perfectly fine for our friend, which lives in a different territory, then it should be perfect in direct sunshine in our conditions as well. Well, in some cases, if the differences are big enough, it might result in total failure. So before we decide how much light we should provide to our orchid, we absolutely need to report to our conditions and pretty much the game we're playing. Nothing wrong with bending some rules or adapting rules, but some rules are just simply unbendable due to our location and our conditions. And that's about it on the discussion about light and playing the orchid game. So I hope you've enjoyed this video and it gave you a new perspective and a new light on orchids. If you did enjoy it, please give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. Subscribe to my channel for regular orchid and plants videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. And with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye! And then what happens when orchids don't want to play by the rules? So here I have that beautiful Dendrobium helix. He's opening up some buds, really exciting, but oh no! The orchid has no roots, and you can trust me, there are no roots in this pot. The canes though, they don't look quite dead, and this orchid didn't have roots for 6 months already, ever since I purchased it. So I had to cut away all of the other spikes, but I just left one of them. And the orchid doesn't dehydrate. Why? Why is this happening? I really don't know, but I would be much happier if I saw some roots.